Locomotives grew in size as better track and inventions like reliable air brakes allowed longer trains of heavier cars. Growth was always a priority on the railroads.
When did steam locomotives get big, black, and ugly? Well, they got big and enormous in the latter part of the 19th century as the trains that had to be pulled got much heavier. Trains became the most popular way to travel. And so I'd say the major change was simply in the growth and capacity of the steam locomotives, which climaxed basically in the 1920s.
A major locomotive innovation arrived with the 20th century. It was called superheating. Lengths of steam tubing were added to engine boilers to supercharge the steam waiting to feed the main cylinders. Superheater tubing ran through the exhaust flues, giving the hot gases from the fire one last opportunity to raise the temperature and pressure of the steam. More heat in the steam translated into 1/3 more power from the same boiler. Another major innovation was called superpower from Ohio's Lima Locomotive Works. Its principal concept was to enlarge a locomotive's fuel-burning firebox and produce a greater quantity of steam faster. More steam meant more power. It required adding an additional pair of trailing wheels to the locomotive to support the extra weight of the larger firebox. Entire new types of locomotives evolved out of this 1925 technology. The 282 Mikado became a 284 Berkshire. A 462 Pacific was now a 464 Hudson. And 482 Mountain types evolved into 484 Northerns. Railroads were America's first big business, and it seemed like somebody was always coming up with a new technological innovation to make railroading simpler, safer, or just cheaper. One of these entrepreneurs was an African-American engineer named Elijah McCoy.
It's sometimes said that the phrase, the real McCoy, came from a device that he invented, a little device that lets metered amounts of lubrication go to critical parts on the locomotive. What McCoy did was to improve on existing designs to make a much more effective and a much more economical lubricator, a much more reliable one. And it's said that railroad crews preferred his type and began calling it the real McCoy. He later went on to become a recognized international expert in the lubrication of every kind of industrial machinery.
McCoy was one of the many brilliant minds who fired the drive to bring steam locomotion to the forefront of its time. To some people, the city of Chicago is railroading in America. Tracks lead in and out of every corner of the city, and freight yards dot its suburbs. 50 miles northwest of Chicago, much of the city's transportation past is preserved at the Illinois Railway Museum. Its volunteers salvage and restore anything from subway and trolley cars to diesel switchers. But when the public visits, people always want to ride the steam train.
I've always loved trains. I grew up alongside the Wabash Railroad in Springfield, Illinois. There's a basic honesty about the machines. They are built for a specific purpose. They do that purpose extremely well. My real-world job, I'm a trial attorney in Chicago, but at least one day a weekend, sometimes two, I come out here. This is my mental therapy. Out here, it's just working on the railroad.
The museum holds over 350 historical pieces of equipment, housed in over a dozen sheds and barns. They'd like to be able to restore every single piece.
restoring and operating the equipment is all volunteer work. The effort that would go into restoring just a simple passenger car might be 10 or 15 years of work. A steam locomotive might take a decade or more to rebuild from the ground up. The work that goes into rebuilding or even just maintaining an operating steam locomotive or an operating streetcar is dirty, filthy, terribly hard physically, sometimes terribly depressing because you build something and fix it and the part right next to it breaks. And that happens fairly often. And you get a little disgusted at times. But eventually, after many years, you have a piece of machinery that's living history, something that your parents or grandparents or great-grandparents may have ridden on, is back live again, back on the rails, with new generations of people coming out to see it.
The largest working steam locomotive at the museum is a 210 dating back to 1918. Locomotives that got much bigger began facing certain operating problems. In 1889, Frenchman Anatole Mallet devised a solution to a growing problem. Locomotives couldn't easily steer around curves in the track beyond a certain length. Rather than powering 5 or 6 pair of driving wheels attached to the same frame with 1 pair of cylinders, Mallet hinged the frame and created a flexible locomotive. He built the boiler and 1 set of driving wheels on the back. He then installed a 2nd set of cylinders and driving wheels on the independent front frame, allowing the whole locomotive to bend through a curve. What he had was 2 engines under 1 boiler. Mallet, or articulated locomotives, came in 2 varieties. Simple articulated meant that the boiler supplied steam to 2 sets of equal-sized cylinders. Compound articulateds had larger-sized cylinders in the front and small ones in back. The compound design allowed hot steam straight from the boiler to power the regular-sized rear cylinders. The steam expelled from these would then be sent to the larger front cylinders. Their extra size compensated for the reduced pressure of the second-hand steam they utilized. Recycling the system had its benefits, but other drawbacks to the compound cylinder system limited the locomotive's success. But simple articulateds like the 2666 Alleghenies and 4884 Big Boys enjoyed productive careers hauling millions of tons of freight for up to 20 years. Still another way locomotive builders tried to squeeze every ounce of power out of conventional steam was by adding 3rd cylinders between the locomotive's driving wheels. Maintaining the inside cylinder was a nightmare, so their popularity with the railroads never soared. Early steam development was fueled by the simple desire to build a bigger beast. But with increasing competition from cost and labor-efficient diesels in the 40s and 50s, steam evolution became a fight for steam survival. Perhaps the most unusual steam locomotives that ever evolved were the steam turbines. Turbine-driven pistonless units that either generated electricity to run traction motors or were directly geared to the wheels themselves. In 1938, General Electric built 2 steam turbine electrics attempting to compete with Electromotive Corporation's diesel electrics. They were scrapped within 5 years. The Pennsylvania Railroad experimented with a direct drive steam turbine in the 40s, and in 1947, the Chesapeake and Ohio Railroad acquired 3 steam turbine electrics. Their turbines were rated at 6,000 horsepower, and they were billed as the world's largest single-unit passenger locomotives. But continual breakdowns did them in. They too were scrapped in 1950. The final steam turbine of note belonged to steam railroading's last major line, the Norfolk and Western. Number 2300, the John Henry, weighed over 800,000 pounds. It was built in 1954. Though it was successful, it was too big and came too late, and like all of its turbine predecessors, was scrapped in just a few years. Steam turbines worked well in clean, stable environments like boats and power plants, but they couldn't hold up to the dirt, dust, and physical pounding railroad locomotives faced day after day. The growing benefits of diesel locomotives were rapidly closing the curtain on the steam era. Diesel's brightly painted colors were practically synonymous with the bright future they promised the rails. People tended to think of steam engines as black and sooty, but some were colorful and quite stunning. The Southern Railway's crescents were green and gorgeous. Santa Fe's Blue Goose was sky blue. And Southern Pacific's classy Daylights were called the most beautiful trains in the world. They ran from San Francisco to Southern California. Maybe that's why they were sunny orange. Not every steam engine was black, and even the ones that were remained majestically handsome until the railroads dropped their fire for the last time.
My grandfather used to fire part-time on the Cotton Belt Railroad. Today, I fire. One of my best friends in far southern Illinois was a fireman on the Illinois Central. In fact, he fired the last live steam locomotive on the Illinois Central. When I last saw him several years ago, he's now well into his 80s. He handed me his fireman's scoop that he used on that last run and said, "This should go from one fireman to another." We're keeping that alive. And that's part of the charm. That's what draws me to this.
Cheyenne, Wyoming sits on the high plains in the southeast corner of this wind-blown state. It was once a hub of activity on the Union Pacific Railroad. In its own way, the Cheyenne Yard still is. The Union Pacific is the only major American railroad that maintains an active steam program. And its steam operations are based here in Cheyenne.
This is like running a dinosaur farm. Nobody else does this. No other railroad does this. Trying to maintain 1940s machines in 1990 and have them operate reliably, find parts for them, make parts for them, whatever, and keep the skills alive is a tremendous challenge.
Unlike a park or museum, the UP Steam Shop is part of a working railroad and not open to the public. Instead, Steve Lee and his crew take the locomotives out to the public on scheduled excursions throughout Union Pacific territory.
It's a lot of fun taking this thing around and making people happy. You don't see very many frowns around this thing. And a lot of people enjoy seeing these. It brings back memories for a lot of people. For most people, it's something they've never seen before or may never see again. But it's a unique machine.
The 4664 Challenger type engine number 3985 is the largest operating steam locomotive in the world. It was recommissioned and restored in 1981, and while number 3985 is currently being rebuilt, it's toured the country as a public relations ambassador, pulling excursion specials and occasionally working freight trains.